Well, I guess many of us will remember the day when Virgin Blue started flying in Australia in 2000. It doesn't seem that long ago, I guess. And so we're at a pretty pass. We welcome to the program Michael West, an independent finance journalist. Good morning to you, Michael.
Good morning, guys.
All right, give us a little bit of background before we get to what the future is here. You've been sort of tracking Virgin pretty closely and their finances and what's been happening. What's led to this point in time?
Well, it's just gone broke. It's insolvent and probably going to go into administration this morning because it doesn't have sort of any revenue coming in, and it's got $5 billion worth of debt. So everybody assumed this was going to happen if there was no government assistance, and the government has held fast against calls for equity stakes and that kind of thing. But there is an absolutely obvious and an elegant solution which hasn't been covered at all, and that can be found in Section 51 of the Constitution, an act of British Parliament, which is compulsory acquisition or nationalisation. And all it says is that you must pay a fair price, and they can buy the business but not have to buy any shares or get messed up in an equity situation or loans or anything like that. They can protect the 10,000 staff, put the planes in the desert for a while, drain them of oil, and keep those people in work.
Well, does this government have an appetite for nationalisation, though, Michael?
Well, this is the thing. I think there's a bit of dogma and a bit of sort of economic theology around nationalisation, but it's an obvious solution. The government can do it. It just needs to go and pass a quick law through Parliament, and then go and buy the business, not buy the shares.
Okay, Michael, a lot of people would say that's regressive. We had a nationalised airline all those years ago in Qantas, and of course that's no longer the case. It's been a thriving airline since it's been publicly floated. I guess a lot of people would say that it's a step backwards.
Why? I can't understand why you would say it's a step backwards. Qantas was originally bought by the government before it was floated. Again, it hasn't been a successful investment at all, despite having a couple of huge years of booming profits. But don't forget, it paid very little tax over a 10-year period until last year. It did pay dividends to its shareholders, and it had some very rich years, and Alan Joyce picked up $24 million salary and that kind of thing, but that doesn't mean it was a spectacular investment. Airlines are generally very bad investments, and at the moment, it's quite feasible that every airline in the world is technically insolvent.
Well, Michael, tell us about the ownership of Virgin.
Well, see, this is really where a lot of the heat in this debate, Wendy, is happening, because Virgin shares are 90% owned by, four foreign airlines, two Chinese, Singapore Airlines and Etihad, and they have declined. Shareholders are meant to support the company and tip in money, when required, and they have decided not to. Richard Branson's got about 10.5% as well. So he's a billionaire, obviously, who could bail this out on his own, on his own. But rather than that, the shareholders decided to tell Paul Scurrah, the CEO, to go and ask the government for money. So Scurrah has gone out and he's asked the government for $1.4 billion when the total value of his company on the ASX was only half that. Mm-hmm. So that was a cheeky thing. Then they went around the states and tried to get money out of the states. But the issue is the federal government could come in right over the top and just buy the thing, buy the airline, buy the assets, and just let the creditors fight out for whatever that just price is. It's a matter of people are going to take a haircut here. When you're a banker or a shareholder, you're using your risk capital to make a profit. They've done that. There is no profit. The thing now needs to be taken out.
Okay, you've offered your solution there. What do you think is the likely outcome, though, here, Michael? What do you think will happen?
Well, the problem with that solution, you're going to have a lot of people arguing against it for various reasons. But right at the moment, if you read the financial press, you've got stories about sort of vulture capital types, the sort of cufflink bottom feeders, PE people, private equity people running around offering deals and trying to get into the Virgin data room and saying, look, why don't we buy the debt for this amount, and then we'll put a bit of capital in, and we'll get this amount of control and so on. And if the government tips in this, the problem with all these deals, they're going to get very, very messy, because there are a lot of people at this table. There are a whole lot of debt holders, banks, bondholders, etc. There are the four airlines, which are the major shareholders. There's Branson himself, who's got the intellectual property to the brand. So there's all these people around. See, this is the problem with the government taking an equity stake. They would suddenly end up sitting around a table with all these competing interests, all arguing for as much, much money as they could get. And the private equity guys, you remember when ANZEP went down in 2001, there were all sorts of proposals to revive it. Solomon Lew and Lindsay Fox was one, and once they got their foot in the door, they started asking for government money. So it's going to be the same thing. And so if the government wants to embark upon this torturous process of sort of letting the private sector sort this out, they're just going to get the private sector coming to them and asking for more money anyway. It's going to get incredibly messy. And what we need in this situation is decisive behaviour.
And Michael, if this airline does fold and we go back to a single airline in Australia, what effect is that going to have on airline prices and the aviation industry in our country?
Well, that's a great question, Robbie. And this is most people with a sensible opinion on this are looking at it going, if Qantas ends up with a monopoly situation, air tickets will go through the roof. It will not be good for the aviation market. It will deliver once again a monopoly over Australian air travel to one airline. That's not a good position for anybody much, except Qantas shareholders and executives. It will not be good for the economy or for air travellers. So really the sensible position is to somehow maintain the duopoly. Now, there are some sensible trade buyers for this too. Air New Zealand will be an obvious one. That's a well-run airline. They haven't got the money at the moment. They would need government backing. There'd be all sorts of politics around it. Singapore Airlines is another one, but they are a shareholder of Virgin now, and maybe they've got a proposal on the table or they're interested in doing something further. But right at the moment, I mean, the oil futures went negative, 300% down overnight. I mean, these things are just, we're in the middle of an incredible economic disaster, the biggest in our lifetimes right at the moment. So for people with capital, they're going to do the best deal they can to get a good return right at the moment.
We're speaking with Michael West, who's an independent finance journalist. Our foreign ownership laws present a bit of a problem here, don't they, in some ways?
Yeah, there are a lot of regulatory obstructions to any deal. One of them is that under the takeover laws, you can't own a certain amount, but more than, I think, 20% without creeping at 3% at a time. So that slows up any sort of bid unless somebody comes in and lobs a total takeover bid for the company. But they wouldn't do that now because there's no value there. That's the problem. We do need the airline, but there's no value there at the moment for takeovers. Then there's foreign ownership laws, which you would have to legislate to lift to allow a foreign airline to take over Virgin. So there are a number of regulatory impediments, and this is the issue where, okay, right at the moment nobody can fly much. There's a bit of interstate travel and a little bit of regional travel, but really we don't know when that's going to all rectify with the coronavirus. But the time frame is the issue here. Government really has to decide to move or not to, or resolutely not to move. But and if it doesn't move, the private sector is unlikely to sort it out very quickly.
Right. And Michael, I did want to ask, though, if we do continue to have Virgin in some kind of shape or form in Australia, it's unlikely to be as large as it is at the moment, though, I take it. It'll be a pared down version of it.
Well, you would think so. What they would do, any potential buyer would look at where they can make money, and they would immediately get rid of, well, first of all, one of Virgin's big mistakes was trying to take on Qantas in the premium end, trying to be the all-round airline rather than, it came in as Virgin Blue, as Wendy mentioned in the preamble, and that was a discount airline, but then it tried to be all things to all people, and that was a failed strategy. So you would have somebody getting rid of all the unprofitable businesses and routes and all the high expenses as well.
Yeah. Well, of course, Michael, a couple of texts here saying, well, you're a lefty, you love the idea of nationalisation. But I
I'm
guess
not
it's
lefty, I'm just completely rational. Wendy is just the most obvious idea, but it makes total sense. There's nothing really to do left or right. It's just to do with good management, really.
But you will, of course, as we just mentioned there a little earlier, alluded to. I mean, the word nationalisation would give a lot of people the heebie-jeebies.
I don't know why it would give people the heebie-jeebies. I think if people have been brainwashed by neoliberal doctrine, and they believe that. I mean, don't forget, it was only 10 or 12 years ago with the GFC that the banks were bailed out, and now we own their risk. Well, I'm not sure whether all the neoconservative people are saying, that was a bad idea. I mean, the fact is capitalism has fallen into crisis, second time in a dozen years, and there's government intervention already in the banks. The banks are being propped up via this quantitative easing program again, via all sorts of liquidity, repos with the Reserve Bank and things like that. This idea that there's some sort of free market operating at the moment is just not true.
All right. Well, they are incredibly uncertain times, as you said, the biggest hit to the economy and the biggest upset in our lifetimes, that's for sure. Can
I just ask something before we let you go, Michael? A few people on our text line are saying, well, what chance of me recouping that airfare that I paid for a while ago? Thoughts?
I don't think people will be getting their money back for airfares. I just don't think that's plausible, nor, unfortunately, for the people on the velocity points scheme either. I think they can kiss that goodbye. But right at the moment, we're talking about families putting food on the table, 10,000 people with another 6,000 dependent on them. Mm-hmm. So really, at the moment, it's about protecting that above all other things, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be a really trying day for people who work for Virgin, that's for sure. Hey, Michael, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.